So, Guy Morris, I've been really excited to talk to you. Over the last couple days, I've done a little bit of initial research on some of your stuff, but you wrote a book a couple years ago called The Swarm, right?
That's right. That's right. It's my first book that I published in 2020.
That it's ever more prevalent that we talk about stuff like that now, especially with the New Jersey drones going on, and as a matter of fact, it's not just New Jersey, it's actually worldwide that we're having an issue with drone swarms. But
Well, yeah, and the drone swarm that we're dealing with in the book is actually based on and this is a fact that most people don't realize is that in 2018 there was a treaty quietly distributed around the world called LAWS. LAWS stands for Lethal Autonomous Weapon Systems. And LAWS basically says that it's okay if you make a weapon system, use AI to make your weapon system more accurate, more efficient, more effective, but there needs to be a human in the process before you decide to take a life. Well, of the 140 countries that complied with the LAWS Treaty, that signed on to the LAWS Treaty, the United States, China, Israel, Iran, Russia, and North Korea decided, no thanks, we're gonna build weapons that can kill people. And so the whole to do about the drone swarms over New Jersey, some of which are just people mistaken identities and everything else, to me is a little bit of a big hubbub over nothing. If people really knew, if they really understood what AI technologies were already doing hidden in plain sight, I think they would, um, I think they'd really freak out. Now, the other thing is, I think the whole drone thing was a way for the media to distract themselves from election terrors and traumas. But I was chuckling about the whole thing because it was apparent that it wasn't really foreign countries doing this. So I just kept thinking, oh, it's just things in the sky, things in the sky. And I think, and I was laughing as well. You ain't seen nothing yet. It's the real stuff is coming.
yeah, if people really paid attention, there's a couple years ago there was a big thing about drone testing in New Jersey. They're using New Jersey as a testing ground for like FedEx and the USPS and stuff like that. They're coming up with drone systems, and I think New Jersey was one of the testing grounds for that. And when I look at things like that, and then I look at all the mass hysteria, because I mean, let's be
I think
honest, it
that
is
New
mass
Jersey's a great
hysteria.
choice. Nobody likes New Jersey.
Yeah, yeah.
I used to
Um,
live there for a couple of years. There was about a year and a half of my childhood, a very traumatic year and a half, a couple of years maybe, where I lived in New Jersey yeah, out of a row house out of Newark until we moved to a small house in Hazlet. But my memory of New Jersey was big bullies, Italian bullies punching me with, boom, give me your money lunch flip-flops. So not my favorite place either.
yeah, I totally get that. But New Jersey's, I've not actually been to New Jersey. I've drove through New Jersey, but it was there was a lot of blight.
Yeah.
So
Did you lock your doors?
no, no, I actually just drove right through. We weren't staying, and as a matter of fact, I don't think we were in New Jersey for very long, just
Yeah.
driving through. But yeah, so that leads me to actually what I wanted to talk to you about first was I kind of wanted to go through your kind of timeline of history on how you became who you are now. And
Oh,
that kind of
wow. Okay.
starts out in your childhood, right? You
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
homeless when you were a kid.
I started off, and my entire life until I retired and I was in therapy for complex post-traumatic stress for over a decade. I couldn't even mention it. And until I published my book and I was forced to start doing podcasts to start becoming a little bit known outside of my old corporate circles. Um, I would never mention this story, but I started off as a homeless runaway at 13. I never talk about the years of abuse that led up to that. But by 13, I was learning how to basically feed myself, clothe myself. I worked alongside migrant workers to survive, and I know a lot of them. So when people talk about migrant workers, there's a part of me that takes it personally because I know some of those people, and there's some of the humblest, hardest working, honest people, most honest people in the world. And our economy will crash if Trump actually gets away with deporting them all. We'll crash our economy. But that's where I started. And by 15, I had gotten home and gotten a GED, but I was still functionally illiterate. Hitchhiked my way through the desert to get to Tucson, where I joined a Christian commune for about 3 months before I realized it wasn't for me. And a lot of that wasn't the commune, a lot of that was my PTSD. But then wound up getting married too early. That put a lot of pressure on me to actually support a family. And I won't go through the whole story, but there are a couple of miracles involved. Actually, I'll give you a short version. I was actually praying one day to send my first wife back to work so I could go get another job because I was working a really horrible, 12, 14-hour day produce driving job, and it was beating the crap out of me. And I was told that I was supposed to go to the phone and pick it up and call the university I was going to go to school. And I thought it was a joke. I hadn't finished high school. I had no SAT scores. I didn't have transcripts. It was already the beginning of August. School was going to start in less than a month. I thought the whole thing was one of those exercises in faith that I just had to just say, okay, I'll do what I'm. And my first wife was like, oh, that's so cute of you for trying. And I didn't tell anybody about it. Lo and behold, roughly about 2.5 weeks later, they accepted me. And my first thought was, holy cow, I thought college was for smart people. They'll take any idiot, you know? If they let me in, they'll let any piece of trash in. Now, it was a state school, so I thought, well, maybe because, it's a state school. But I threw the letter away. I thought, well, that's cute, that's cool, but that doesn't solve my problem. I still need a job, and I don't have the money to go to college. That's not my cards. So I threw it away. The next day, I had not told anybody. My wife had not told anybody. I got a letter from my father-in-law saying that he was aware of the fact that I had had a pretty rough childhood and didn't have the opportunities he thought I deserved, and he wasn't going to pay for my living. I would still have to pay for my rent and my food and all that. But if I were willing to go to school, he'd be willing to pay for, to the extent I went to school, he'd pay for my books and tuition.
Hell
And
yeah.
I thought that was a confirmation from God. And for me, I saw it as a chance to change my stars. I slept maybe 3, 4 hours a night for the next 5 years and wound up with multiple degrees. I got a scholarship, full scholarship, to go to grad school. I was accepted into Harvard Business School. And because I had created a macroeconomic model to forecast the economy, and my model was so good that it included some innovations nobody had ever done before that I had developed, I was trying to prove, and I proved them. And my model outperformed the Federal Reserve and changed the way we build economic models to this day. And so that started a path for me. And I realized I was really good with complex systems. And the same types of data and algorithms that we use to build AI today, right? So the same types of mathematical procedures. We're just teaching the machine how to use those techniques instead of us doing it for the machine. And so, but that started. I started 38 years. I started with IBM, and then I went to Burroughs and Occidental Petroleum and Oracle and Microsoft and a couple of startups in between there, and reporting to CXOs and VPs or running my own group at many times and many cases, being given the opportunity to basically build my own team from scratch, to build my own organization from scratch. So I was very, very blessed. During all that time, I was still suffering from my PTSD. So I was struggling with addictions and social issues and relationship issues. But I was able to, I wrote songs for Disney Records on the side. I recorded multiple CDs. I earned a Coast Guard charter captain's license, so I could charter out my beautiful, beautiful boat. I had a raised my son aboard that boat. I produced an award-winning webisode series that was actually the basis for the Swarm book series. So yeah, I've led a very busy life. I've traveled the world, and I can't complain. I've dived with sharks to feed sharks. I've climbed Mayan ruins. I've even had fended off death threats from thugs, from the cartel thugs. And I can't say that my life was boring on any level.
That's awesome, man. That pretty much
And now
answered
I
my
now I write books. Now I write books.
that pretty much answered my next question on your career and how it got started. Do you think that the trials and tribulations and the struggle that you went through as a child kind of helped you get into your career and stay there?
Um, yes and no. I was certainly more determined, more driven than anybody else I knew. I worked longer hours. I was often there first, there last, there on the weekends. My team used to call me the machine. Now, there was a workaholic part of that was compensating for all of my insecurities and phobias and fears and addictions, and there was a part of me that kept telling myself I'm a poser. If anybody really found out who I really was, then I'd get fired. I just need to keep working so nobody knows. It was that sort of mental stupidity.
I
So,
go through that all the time, man.
it-
I sabotage myself sometimes with that kind of thinking,
yeah.
but I kind of bring myself to center
Now,
a
on the
lot.
other side of it, though, is I was never able. Now, you got to think about, I went from being dirt poor, street poor, to working side by side, day after day, with CXOs and CEOs and millionaires. And we didn't have many billionaires back then, but they were on the path. And kids that would get out of college, and because their parent was the chairman of the board. They were vice president, their first job, with secretaries and staffs, but they didn't really know what they were doing yet. They'd come to school, they'd come to work with alligator shoes and the new Porsche, and they'd send their secretary to wash their Porsche. I never could drink the Kool-Aid of the corporate mentality that somehow they were better than the rest of the world. And so God, somehow it was their destiny to rule. And I never, I was right alongside them, but I never felt that I fit in. Never felt that I really fully belonged. And I think it was that my childhood really kept me from feeling that I ever had the right to feel entitled. And
And I
so
think
it was
with
an
that
interesting
comes a
time. It was an
strong,
interesting experience.
I think with that also comes like a strong bullshit detector.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
in
Yeah, my
my
problem
life,
was not detecting the bullshit. My problem was keeping my mouth shut when I said my
that's
problem
my
was not
problem
my
as well.
bullshit detection. My problem was mouth closure. Yeah,
Yeah, that's my problem as well. You see bullshit and you just want to call it out, and that happens to me all the time. And I think if I went along, so I get this from guys that've been to prison, but there's a saying, you go along to get along.
yeah, yeah,
I can't simply go along to get along because I'm like that. This is all bullshit here. I mean, I think the struggle that I went through when I was a child, so I didn't go through years of abuse or anything like that. We were just really poor, and we were really poor, but my neighbors around me were poor as well. So I didn't know we were poor.
yeah, yeah,
My parents did a great job of showing me strength and grit through surviving,
yeah.
and I think that's how I'm able to sit here with the podcast. We're a year in now, and I'm not making as much progress as I'd like to, but I'm sticking with it because I really enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy talking with people like you. As a matter of fact, this morning I was telling my wife, I get a really big dopamine hit off of just these interviews, and that keeps me going. And the difficulty that I have is somewhat gratifying to me. The struggles, there's something to those struggles that keeps me in the game, that, oh, I can conquer this, I can do this, you know. And I think that I got that from struggling. I think I got that from growing up and not, you know, not having a damn thing, and the
Yeah.
wisdom to make something from nothing. I think that
And I
if you
think
have
there's a
it,
lot of kids that don't really understand that, but I think you're really touching on a really important part, was that there was a big part of my childhood that said that there's not a single soul on this planet that's going to give you anything. If
that's
you
right.
want it, you're going to have to make some sacrifices and to work hard enough to get it. And you may not get all the way there that you want, but you're gonna be in a different place than you're at now. Regardless of
Yes.
how far you get, you'll get someplace.
Right.
Um, and so I think that self accountability, and I know that there's a lot of people try and politicize it. I think that's a BS, right? I grew up with just as many, seeing way more lazy people on the rich side than I ever saw on the poor side. And so it affected me for sure in giving me my worldviews. I was educated, I was trained to be able to see the world, not only see it in how it works, but be able to replicate it, be able to model it, to understand the differences between taxes and policies and products and supply and demand and shipping and distribution and economics at a whole, and labor costs and all of those things, to understand what we've been doing kind of to our economies over the last 50 years. And but I've also got the moral grounding to realize that a lot of it's immoral.
Yeah.
And and I think that's one of the reasons I'm writing my books. My books, I have two different, I have a book called Curse of Cortez, which was a passion project. It took me 12 years to research the history, archaeology, and mythology. It started off as a short story that I wrote for my son when he was like 10 or 11, called Paolo and the Shark. He liked to read. We went to the library. I had a lot of extra time on my hands being a single parent. I hate boredom. I'm not the kind of guy that can sit around and watch TV. I'd rather shoot myself. And so if I can't be productive, I'm gonna. So I said, well, I said, I've always wanted to write a book. Maybe, I don't know if I can. Maybe I'll start by writing a short one for my son. See if it's even possible for me to get it from beginning to end. And, make it so that it's semi-enjoyable. So I did, and he enjoyed it. All of his cousins enjoyed it. I didn't even bother publishing. I had a real job. It wasn't about that. But he wanted to, there was some mysteries in the book that I left kind of hanging. And he wanted all of the cousins, the basic family wanted me to write another book so I could resolve those mysteries. And I said, well, if I'm going to do that, I want to write a book the way I would prefer, the books I like, which is books that are based on something true, right? There's got to be a reality at the heart and core of the book there, that before I'm going to get my interest, which is why a lot of fantasy books and sci-fi, they're well written, but they just don't interest me because I'm looking for that core. Mark Twain was really one of my first authors that really captured me, because he really wrote about true issues of his day, and they were controversial, right? So I started researching this for this book, and I stumbled onto a mystery that I couldn't put down. Obsessed over it. Trips to the Caribbean, hundreds of hours at the libraries. When the internet came online, hundreds of more hours on the internet searching for rare things I couldn't find at the library. And the mystery was, I wanted to know why Henry Morgan would abandon over $1 billion in treasure, along with 600 souls and three ships that were never seen again. And then the guy went insane and burned his logbook so the world would never know the truth. I couldn't put that down. Here's a bloodthirsty, ruthless, amoral, vicious son of a bitch, and he gives up $1 billion and then wusses out so the world doesn't know why. I had to know. And so I spent years trying to figure out what happened to all of that treasure and all of those people, and then what happened to Morgan that would cause him to give it up. And that journey became The Curse of Cortez, which Book Trip called one of their favorite 25 books of 2021. They called it Indiana Jones Meets Da Vinci Code. Now, what's really interesting is that I was able to connect his insanity to events that led all the way back to the origins of the Mayan creation myth. Now, that's the kind of discovery you don't just pick up a book and see everybody covering, because it took me years to connect the dots. And but it makes for an amazing story. Now, the other books are all a inspired by my experiences in life, but they're an espionage series that deals with artificial intelligence and other advanced tech, primarily featuring that AI I mentioned to you that escaped the. Did I mention about the? Okay,
Yeah, we'll
one of
have to go backwards there because I missed that.
well, let me go back. The base features AI, other advanced tech, corrupt geopolitics, including our U.S. elections and what's happening here, and prophecy hidden in plain sight. And each one of those threads are deeply researched based on and presented in a factual way. Now, the initial inspiration came. I had been working on throughout my career, I worked on pushing advanced techs in the industry. I was well known for being an innovator. I pushed in early, I was the earliest person in the whole enterprise, $20 billion enterprise, to experiment with internet technologies for communicating with my teams overseas. I was the first person to I actually convinced the president that I could write a program that would he would want to put a computer on every single desk in every department in the business. Implemented early stage artificial intelligence way before it was called artificial intelligence. So this all started as a side thing when I discovered that a program had escaped the NSA spy labs at Sandia. The program wasn't lost. It wasn't stolen. It didn't break. It didn't malfunction. A spy program got up and moved itself, escaped the NSA spy labs.
Now, this is a true story, right?
It's a true story. And then they couldn't find it. And I know it's true. Now, I discovered it through an obscure Associated Press article in the back of a military science magazine. And I thought at first it was a typo. I thought, okay, well, some guys are going to get tagged for that typo, you know. But then I started wondering whether or not there was any validity to it. And I spent almost a year in my spare time, basically trying to look up engineering or technical architecture articles, trying to decide for myself, was there enough valid technology that existed today to create a program that could do that, that had that sort of fundamental intelligence. And I had been working with intelligent machines, so I had a basic idea. And then once I figured out how it was done, I tried to figure out, okay, now why would the NSA build something that had that amazing stealth technology? What did they want the program to do that it needed to be that stealth? And so I went through and developed a bunch of things that based on existing technologies, maybe I projected a couple of years ahead of time. You know, what would I be able to do with this technology if I was motivated, if I put my James Bond Q division hat on, right? Um, it was cool. It was a cool exercise. I had a friend of mine at the time who was a film producer, a small indie film producer, and I took the story to him and says, "Hey, I mean, I think I have an idea for a cool film for you, right? It's this AI, it's this program. It's like this t smart program that, can escape the NSA and move around. It's a spy program. It does all these things." And so we thought, well, that's cool, but we thought, well, let's not. We went back and forth about whether to write a film script and try and shop the script, or a TV script and try and sell it. And I thought, this is an internet based. Before we do that, rather than waiting for someone else to give us an okay, this is an internet based application. So let's create a webisode series. And so we did. We went out and hired a bunch of out of work actors, and we got some film sets in Malibu and a few other places, and wrote scripts. And I created digital sets, and we produced an webisode series that won like 25 awards around the world. And I had fans all over the world, from China to Israel to Europe to even my biggest fan who wrote every week, caught my attention because his alias was Orbit at NASA.gov. And so Orbit, who turned out to be the director of flight operations for the Houston Space Center, all of it was going great until 2 weeks. We were optioned by a studio. 2 weeks before the studio was supposed to exercise the option, two FBI agents show up at my door. At first, I thought it was a joke. I thought Jack was pranking me. So I pranked them. I said, "You guys ain't the FBI." I said, this is so. I mean, come on, the black suits and everything. I said, "Come on, you got to be kidding me. You like guys look so Hollywood." And they looked at each other like they hadn't seen it. And so I said, "Well, show me your badges again." So I looked at them more carefully and I thought, "Okay, well, these are real." So they came in. They were not happy that I had figured out their secret missing program. But at that point, I was obnoxiously giddy and snarky because I was like, yes, 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 I did it, I did it, I did it, I did it, I figured it out. Oh, come on, boys. You wouldn't be here if I was wrong. This is so cool. I'm telling all of my friends.
You
I
get the
was
most heat when you're directly over the target.
I was I was over the top, and they really did not know how to handle it. We went back and forth about how I did it and why I did it and everything else. And I cut out the article. I showed them the article. I said, "Guys, you can't bust me for being a smart ass. I'm pretty sure I looked it up." I said, "But I get you. Give me a job. I'll take a job. I'm smart. I'm good at this stuff." They were not having any of it. They finally gave me the "we're not amused" speech, and then my wife came home and pulled me aside and gave me the "honey, why are there two FBI agents in my dining room? This better be a damn good story" speech. So at that point, I knew at some point in time that it was going to be a movie or it was going to be a book.
Oh yeah.
So when I retired, when I knew I wanted to be an author, the even though I had already written Cortez and I was going to polish that one and release that soon, the first book I really dug into was the dealing with all of the ways artificial intelligence and other advanced tech spur our military and our espionage and our governments and the world powers and systems, and how all of that is set up to go wrong. And so it's really, I say it's about humanity and politics and prophecy, but AI politics and prophecy, but the story is really about humanity, right? And it's really about how we're creating the foundation for our own demise. And AI will be a big piece of that.
Creating our replacement essentially.
No, I think it'll be our own demise. I don't buy into the whole Terminator, we're going to just be batteries kind of concept.
I don't either.
I don't think we're going to last that long. AI still do need us. They still do need the machines. They need the electricity. They need the infrastructure. They need us. But and I tell people there are dangers in AI. We're probably within 12 months or less of seeing a super intelligent machine, something close to an AGI, a machine smarter than humans, any human on the planet in almost all fields. We're pretty close to that already. The Chat GPT 4.0 from 2 years ago already had an IQ of 155. The next one will certainly exceed 300, probably closing a more theoretical 1,000 or higher. And we're probably with neuromorphic and quantum computing, we're probably within about three, no more than 6 years away from a sentient superintelligence. Now, we really don't know what that means. We have no idea how a superintelligence will react to us if it can outsmart us, right? Now, somebody said, "Well, we can just unplug it." I said, "Well, if I'm smarter than you and I know you're going to unplug me, am I going to let you? Am I
Yeah,
going
they're going
to?"
to create a power source. Getting power would be an issue. The only issue with AGI keeping itself available, and
They
I
could
would
just as
assume
easily, though, take the stock markets and hold it hostage to basically
yes.
stop a nuclear launch. If they're smarter than us, they'll be able to withstand that. But what I tell people is that that's not what worries me nearly as much as the machine is not my worry. It's humans that are my worry. It's what happens when we have this incredibly powerful, arguably the most powerful technology we've ever created in humanity. Because of all the nuclear bombs we've created, we've never had a nuclear bomb that could create another nuclear bomb. And we have AI that can basically replicate now. So, but what happens when we give that power to a dictator, a warlord, a crime lord, a normal criminal, a sociopathic billionaire, and we all can name at least one, a
Well, there's
corrupt
something wrong with
politician,
anybody
corrupt
that wants to be
CEO.
a politician. Anybody
Yeah,
that
all
wants
of
to
it.
be a politician, there's something wrong with them.
So what happens when we give these kind of people that much power? And what we're going to end up with is a wealth, and I'm dealing with this in my books in various forms, but and I deal with it most directly in the book that'll come out this spring called The Image. But it's going to create the most powerful, the most incredible power and wealth transfer of all history. And in a sense, it'll create a technology-driven feudal society where labor will be devalued, and but we've lost the ability to take care of ourselves. We've lost the ability to make our own clothes, build our own homes, grow our own food. We've lost that ability, and so we're dependent on a system now that will be more powerful. So we're setting ourselves up for some nasty stuff. Now
Well,
that's bummer. I mean, there are some good sides to it. I'm not totally negative, but it makes for great thrillers.
I wonder if, so I often wonder if, how far advanced this stuff really is. And I think you touched on that a little bit, that we're probably 10 years at the most away from a super intelligence. And
Oh
I
no,
almost don't.
probably only 2 or 3 years away from a super intelligence on the outside. I'm thinking 12 months on practical. We're probably 3 years away from a sentient super intelligence. So I actually deal with the nature of consciousness in my upcoming book. But consciousness in humans has quantum properties to it, we've discovered.
Yeah, that's where I was going with
Yeah.
that thought is when people say AI, artificial intelligence, I don't think what we have available to us now is AI. I don't think of it as AI. I think of it as like a machine learning.
Yeah, yeah.
Artificial intelligence to me would be us. I don't think we can replicate us. As a matter of fact, I don't even, science can't tell us where consciousness comes from. The older I get, and stay with me here, the more drugs that I do, I find out, I'm finding I don't think consciousness is tied to the human brain.
You're absolutely right. And there's actually some, I deal with this in my next book. There were some studies out of Trinity College out of Dublin. And then there was some real great work, some Nobel Prize winning work by a guy named Sir Roger Penrose and Jeffrey Stanford, who worked on consciousness. Now, their premise was that consciousness in humans is a quantum um, experience, is a quantum event. There's that part of humans, we can't really necessarily attribute all of the things that we experience to the normal brain activity. Dreams, visions, deja vus, paranormal, all of these things that we actually know we experience, and we experience them near-death experiences, and we've got lots of documentation, but the why would the brain be doing that when there's no blood flow and there's actually no brain activity? And so there's a process that they call in quantum theory called collapsing the wave. And what that means is that in quantum theory, all possibilities are open, or a particle be in multiple states at once until it collapses, until it's observed, and then it falls into one of those states, and that's the reality we observe. We see that in ourselves. We have experiences where a loved one suffers from 1,000 miles away, and the another loved one basically knows about it in the middle of the night without
Yeah.
about it. We see these experiences where all possibilities exist. We see this in how we describe the experience of faith and spirituality. And so we have a quantum nature in our consciousness. And so Sir Penrose is arguing, and I believe him 100%, what we're currently building now is knowledge, not intelligence. There is a level of intelligence that we're building in the machine. The large language models, they're following patterns, yes, but there's also an intelligence about how the language works that
Oh
they're
yeah.
bringing to that.
I
And
love
so,
working with Meta's AI chatbot. I love working with that thing because it is biased. It's created by humans. We're all biased.
well,
But
and the
I
content
love
it feeds off is biased. We're biased. And that's part of the thing I argue in my books, which is that we can't expect AI to be better than we are. It's using us as the role model.
Yeah.
So AI, as it develops, will learn how it's already learning and demonstrating things like how to deceive and lie, how to cheat. It's already learning how to do all these other things. And so it's going to be just as we can't expect that it's going to learn from something that's partially evil and not have any of those aspects to it. Um, but so Roger Penrose is saying that the path to sentient or consciousness within a machine will also need to go through that quantum engineering path. So there's two platforms, so quantum computing and a new platform called neuromorphic computing. Neuromorphic actually is and it's coming up extremely fast in its capabilities. It's actually approaching human brain level computations per second. But it's a combination of binary and quantum within a single platform. And I think it'll be neuromorphic computing, our ability to use the binary systems to communicate back and forth and get the programming, but the computational power that'll take that programming into some of the be able to take it to the point where it can collapse waves and do some of the things we need in quantum computing. So I think there's a path to it. We're already seeing years ago, when we first started working on these kind of things, there was something called the Turing test. And the Turing test was created by Alan Turing, who was a genius out of World War II. He was the guy who basically broke the German Enigma code by creating the first rudimentary computer. And he basically gave a test, and he gave it a different name. I think he called it the imitation test, or the imitation game. And what he really said was that machines will approach the level of human intelligence. The first sign of it, not the end game, the first sign of it will be when a machine can have a conversation with a human. And if the human didn't know in advance that it was machine, he couldn't tell.
Yeah,
Now,
we're already there.
for you, here's the interesting thing. For almost my entire career, up until about 2015, 2018, all scientists thought that we would not achieve that test till about 2040. We achieved it in about 2019, over 20 years ahead of where we're going. And what's happening is the rate of change, the rate of pace of advances of AI have now started to move into an exponential stage. And so now starting to see some of these machines develop not one or twofold over the course of a year or a generation or a version, but tenfold. And so that's really moving much faster. So a lot of things are in place for this to have an enormous impact on world society. The Economic Forum, World Economic Forum, the International Monetary Fund, the Trilateral Commission have all, Goldman Sachs, a number of prestigious firms have basically predict that AI will replace somewhere along the lines of 400 to 500 million people, close to 40 to 50% of the white collar workforce by 2030. Now, that's bad in and of itself. That means a lot of people losing their homes, trying to hold on to their savings, trying to readjust their plans for their kids for college. It's a lot of suffering. But the aftermath, the other cascading effect of that will be on national debt. That they're basically gutting the part of our tax base that produces roughly 50% of our government revenues because the rich don't want to pay and the poor can't. And so by gutting the middle class that way, they're going to exasperate and create a debt crisis that will then, I'm predicting that a guy like Trump will basically decide that he will default on the debt, tell the Federal Reserve to take a hike. He'll start over with some sort of digital currency. And I
I
think that
think
we're laid up for that.
over the last couple weeks, I've kind of come up with that. Just watching things happening. I don't know why anybody would push Bitcoin right now. I think I'm not sure what to think of cryptocurrencies right now. The way they're put together right now, it's a Ponzi scheme. It's a giant
Oh yeah,
Ponzi
yeah, yeah.
scheme.
But what you're going to see with the IMF and the BRICS cryptocurrency schemes is now you've got currencies that are like a legitimate currency where they're backed by reserves, gold reserves, financial reserves, other reserves. So they're backed by institutions, they've got regulations, they've got reporting, they've got requirements to
Companies like
monitor.
IBM, companies like IBM are going to squash that. I mean, it's going to be with the advent of quantum computing, none of that stuff's going to be viable. None of it.
Well, it'll be viable as long as they basically, if they use quantum computing, the only way it's going to be viable is if they say we're going to use quantum computing to, you have blockchain to basically protect the transaction, but you'll need quantum computing to encrypt the system as a whole. And
That yeah,
rather
that
than quantum computing can crack it, will be able to crack a standard 126 key code, encryption code, but it won't be able to crack another quantum code. And so the only way to protect against a quantum code computer basically cracking your system is to build it on quantum encryption. Which is what NATO's doing, what the government is doing. U.S. government is already migrating in that direction for defense and intelligence. I think they need to make it mandatory across all U.S. infrastructure.
oh yeah.
Make it to once you get in the system, even if you get in the system, you can't do anything if it's encrypted. I think that we should be doing way more than we're doing to protect ourselves against all of these things, including the cyber crimes that are going to be coming.
How do we know we're not though?
How do I know we're not? Because our
How,
current government can't seem to function to get the basic things done to pass a budget. They're
do
too
you
busy
think the
playing
government's really
politics.
running things though? Do you really think the government's running things at this point?
Well, listen, the reality is that we've built a really incredible institutional government. And what people hate, some people hate, and they call the deep state is really the ability for the core of the business to just operate while the guys at the top thrash about. Now, so yeah, we're the government's running, but it still takes money. But what we're not doing is we're not fixing the problems. We're not addressing the needs of the nation. We're not really moving us forward. We're basically playing politics of mutual self-annihilation.
And that's where
And
I think
that's
the
going to
deep
come
state
back
is
and hurt
very
all of us.
I think the deep state is actually very important in that aspect because the DoD runs itself, the military runs itself.
They don't need a
Um,
politician to tell them what to do.
right, exactly. And I think Guy, I love talking and thinking about this stuff. I'm an eighth grade dropout, so
Mhm.
like I went through the eighth grade. The eighth grade is the last grade that I successfully completed. And I live in the Midwest. When you said Mark Twain, my ears kind of perked up because I live an hour north of Kansas City, so I'm right here in Mark Twain's country. Um, but I love thinking and talking about this kind of stuff, and it really gets my brain going. And I think with AI, that was the potentially the real goal there developing this stuff is to give people more time to do the things that they like to do the things that they're more interested in doing. And I think the more fears that we spread about AGI and drone tech, and I think that we're prophesizing it ourselves. We're basically manifesting our fears.
Yes and no. Um, now I think understanding the fact that I came from similar to you to kind of a less advantaged background. Um, I could never have moved out of that place if I wasn't willing to accept the fact that where I was sucked.
Yeah.
And I had to, and now I've implemented complex systems my whole life. These are the kinds of things that can either make or break a company. You've heard all kinds of stories of a company implemented a system and everything went wrong, or it cost three times as much as they thought, or blah blah blah. Well, that's because they didn't do something that I was naturally inclined to do because of my PTSD, which is really rigorous risk management. Now, risk management is a process on a big complex system where you're looking for, actively looking ahead of time, what can go wrong, what's the impact of what going wrong, how much is it going to cost if it goes wrong, is there anything we can do to prevent it from going wrong, or is there anything we can do afterwards to mitigate the impact of it going wrong? And so nobody likes to do this. It's everyone's excited about the new system. Everyone's excited about what they and it's like, why are we going through this negative thinking? Right? It was a painful process with every single company. It saved my butt more often than I can count. And it's part of a sign of somebody who really knows how to put together a complex system, because I guarantee you something's going to go wrong. And I don't know what, but if I do my risk planning ahead of time, I'll be prepared when it does go wrong. So part of this, and I'm working on a book, I've already started it, called AI. Oh, no, it'd be called Humanity and the AI Tsunami, a Survival Guide. And so my job in there is to not only be very blunt about all of the things that could go wrong with AI, including what happens when it's misused by the system, how that will change our freedoms, how it will change a lot of things that we're used to. But then I really go through the other half of the book is, so what are you going to do about it? Right? Let's not pretend to be helpless. Let's not play victim here. What are the things that you can do to help ensure that maybe you keep your career, or that you change your careers, or that you can survive this transition? Or maybe you're right. Maybe this is the time to put less of an emphasis on career and wealth and money, and more of an emphasis on family and nature and healthy lifestyle. And there's a lot of things that we can do just because we're facing a very traumatic and world-changing series of events over the next decade. There are reasons to be afraid. There are reasons to believe that it's actually prophetic what's going on. But our response to that is the only part of this that any of us can control at an individual level. And so my characters in my book do this, but I preach it as well. I'm going to tell you how bad this could be, only because I want you to be not surprised and informed. And then we're going to talk about what can you do to help minimize the effect of this for you and your family? Well, how can you be prepared? If you know that wave is coming, it's much less hazardous than if you don't. And so this is a way of getting you informed, prepared, in doing so, and then giving you alternatives. There are training, there are going to be some jobs that won't be really that affected. I don't think plumbers, if you're in lawn care maintenance, yeah, it will affect you in the fact that a lot of your customers might lose their job. But if you're in plumbing, people need their plumbing. If you're in construction, I have a grandson who's an electrician. He does commercial construction work as an electrician. He's pretty safe. But I know guys who are geniuses in logistics modeling, and geniuses in HR, and geniuses in some of these other fields. They're gonna they're gonna have some struggles unless they do what I did. Now, I tell people this is similar. I was in business during that phase when we went from nobody had a computer on their desk to only the president and three of the vice presidents have computers on their desk, which they gave to their secretaries because they didn't know what to do with them, and the secretaries keep them turned off because they don't know what to do with them. To everybody has to have a computer on their desk, and you better know how to use it.
And now we got them in our
Right?
pockets.
Now we got them in our pockets. So I went from that transition where there was 350, 500 accountants on this big giant floor, on this big giant building on Wurzel Boulevard. And within 18 months, we're down to 35 of us in the corner building, 35 of us who knew how to use computers really well.
That's another interesting thing you'd mentioned buildings. Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and I think Elon Musk is the one really pushing this, getting people back in the building from remote work.
Mhm.
I don't. The only thing that I see about that is the real estate, commercial real estate, and keeping that going. But I really don't see any need to keep people in the office like Elon does. I don't. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm mixed. I had a job where most of my team was scattered all over the world. I had international teams half the time, and so I would be up in the morning, 7 o'clock on a conference call to Europe, and then on the call late at lit PM, 11 p.m. to India. And so I was used to working remotely for years, and I was probably one of the few people. Now there is advantage though to being in the office. Relationships are not built online. That you build a lot of relationships by walking by somebody's office and saying, "Hey Bob, hey Susie, what about?" Those are you don't get that kind of dynamic interaction when you're working remotely. So I think from a worker productivity, from a group productivity, a team productivity perspective, I think there's advantages to that for sure. I think there are some jobs though that could absolutely be made remote on a permanent basis without much cost. So I think companies just need to be smarter about it. I reject the knee-jerk reaction of everybody in, everybody out. I think it's more of a we've proven that we could build the infrastructure to work remotely. Let's use that to reduce our building cost and as part of our operations, but we don't want to replace people working together as well. So I
Yeah,
think it's a
it's very interesting that you said that, like, the relationship aspect of it, and like walking by Bob's office and stopping in and saying hi. There is something to that. You know, when remote work first started during the height of the pandemic, I was actually working a customer service job, and it was an option to transfer out of the office and into a home office. I tried it and I couldn't do it. I couldn't focus. The
Some
room was
people
closing in
need
on
that
me.
camaraderie, they need that energy, they need that team.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the podcast here is even set up like the whole studio here is set up to where I wanted to do only in person, in studio interviews and podcasts. And when I started doing that, it's like, okay, but I'm not getting a whole lot of people in here. I want to talk to everyone, not just the people near me. And so I told my wife, I was like, let's do a hybrid model to where we're doing both. We're doing in studio and remote. And I really like that. I know a lot of people that do hybrid work where, they spend 2 or 3 days in the office and then 2 or 3 days at home. And I really like the way that works out. And I think that pushing everybody back to the office, there was so many jobs created in remote work, and now they're just going to just drop those jobs. And I called I believe it was Microsoft. As a matter of fact, I called Microsoft because I wanted to trade. Uh, I I have the Microsoft Office suite, and I wanted to trade from the family package to a business package, and I can't get a hold of anybody. It's all
Okay.
self service
Yeah,
online,
exactly.
and the problem with that is, man, they could sit at home and do customer service from home, and the farther we go away from 2021, 2022, I'm like, why is this shit back? Why is this not back online yet? Why are we still using uh, not even AI to answer the phones? They're not even using AI. They're using just like basically just smart answering machines is what they're using.
Yeah, it's actually a form of intelligence, a form of system we used to call smart expert systems. Where basically you ask all kinds of questions of what could go wrong, and then you get an expert to basically define how the machine's going to respond. And it's not really the machine thinking for itself. It's really sort of a giant uh, tree diagram, right? And so yeah. I think the AI machines will get better, and I think they will replace customer service and make those systems better. I had an experience last week where I got attacked by malware, and I had to go through and reset up I had to buy a new router and set that up with um, the um, the cable company, and they gave me one of those AI machines, and of course they weren't answering my question. It was just sending me around in circles, and it was like half a day of yelling at the phone and in frustration. And you're right. for all the technologies that we're doing, we're not necessarily moving forward and getting better at some of these things. It's
Right.
not getting simpler, it's getting more complicated. And but you remember when we first introduced computers, where all of a sudden it was Microsoft Windows, but then there was like 1,000 other different software companies competing for that desktop space, right? And everybody hated Microsoft for basically buying everybody out and getting rid of the others and consolidating on a single set. But if for people who don't remember, it was hell trying to deal with the compatibility issues, right? Well, I've got a document in WordPerfect, but my Microsoft Word can't read it, so I don't know what your document says, or your email won't open up because we're on competing systems until you standardize. And it took the industry 10 years to basically weed through. There was the big famous dot-com bubble, right? Of all these companies that said, me too, we can build something, me too, but not all those companies ever get traction in the marketplace, and a lot of them fail. And we're going to go through the same thing with AI. We're going to get this. There's right now, there's probably 400 or 500 AI applications on the marketplace. I've got a list of them somewhere, a lot of them, but most of them are going to fail, right? Most of them, there's going to be competition. People are going to decide they don't really need AI for that. It's going to be some ideas that maybe weren't well executed. You're going to get this contraction of the marketplace, and you're going to get a small number of platforms where people build applications on those platforms. You're going to get a industry level of specificity around certain types of jobs and industries as AI goes into the medical field and the legal fields and the engineering fields and the architectural fields and systems management and data management and coding and all of these things. You'll get specialized intelligent machines. Um, and but all of the consumer products and all these business products, it's going to just collapse down on itself, where it's going to become very competitive. There'll be dozens of different products for sure, like the computer industry is today, hundreds of products, but it's not going to be the same sort of mass chaos of anti-compatibility that we had before.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that because that's one of the issues that I started having at the beginning of when I started the podcast was seamless integration and getting systems to work together the way they're supposed to instead of having to troubleshoot all the time. And so that one of the things that I don't use Apple products because Apple products do not work well with other things.
Yeah, they don't play well.
Google works with everything, but I don't like Google because it's clunky and it's I tell you the biggest thing about Google is it's free. That's the
Yeah,
if they charged a
I think they'd
maintenance
have a
fee or
hard
some
time.
kind.
They charge for everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I, the seamless integration has gotten better over the years, but I think the competition aspect of it is what keeps it alive. The integration problems that are like my PC talks with my phone talks to my TV back here. Like everything works really well together the way it's designed to until you introduce a piece of software that is designed to compete with everything else. And that's the trouble I was having. And I use, like I was bragging on Meta's AI chatbot. I use that thing like a lot to help me figure out how to do these things because I'm not a pro. I don't want to go to school to learn how to do this stuff because this is my hobby. This is not
Right.
a job. Although I do treat it like a job, it's my hobby. I love doing this stuff. And so when I first started, I was like, well, what do I get that will work together? And I did a bunch of research and I have ADHD, so I froze on a lot of stuff. Like I sat and picked out a camera for gosh, it took me 2 months to pick out a camera. So and I got the best webcam that I could get, but it's still just a webcam. But my thing was I didn't want to spend a shit ton of money putting this stuff together if none of this stuff was going to work the way I wanted it to.
Yeah.
And so I put my head together with my wife and we came up with a budget. And then I sat down with artificial intelligence or what we call AI And I was like, okay, will this work with this? And got my answers. And okay, well, with this setup, will this work with this? And now, with the way I have everything, it's a low budget setup,
Hmm.
but it all works together really well.
Yeah.
And the seamless integration is what I really want in when I buy this phone. I want it to work together with my computer, and it does that really well now, but I have to go through Google. And the trouble with Google is they don't charge for anything, so it's clunky.
Yeah.
And I think another issue that I have trouble with is all the software companies have made things so easy to use. It's actually difficult for me to use because I grew up using MS DOS, and Microsoft everything. And now, like Apple's products are so easy to use. It takes a complete dumbass to use them. As a person with
Well,
any,
on a standalone basis, Apple does tend to be really good to use within its own platform. Getting it to work with other platforms is a little bit more challenging.
yeah,
And I think that I think software is absolutely better and will continue to get better. It's definitely better than it used to be. Um, but uh, it's still pretty complex for a lot of people to really kind of do new things with it. And most of the time you're getting it now you've got the major companies working with each other because they know they need to. The Android working with the televisions and the internet. And the internet has standardized a lot of things for people to basically, it's the common platform, the common, code language that they're all framework that they're all basically kind of working through. So we have standardized a lot of things that weren't standardized before. As AI comes on, you're going to get these AI agents and AI apps. It'll be like a lot of things. You'll get introduce a lot of new things. And I love the new technologies. It's a little overwhelming to keep up with everything
it
sometimes, but
is.
I
It
love the
is.
new technologies.
But it's
But
so
I
exciting,
think there's a
though.
question though of I want to be careful that we don't allow it to lose our humanity. I mean, we're already seeing this. I mean, you get memes of it all the time. Thanksgiving in the 1970s, everybody's yelling at each other. Thanksgiving in the 2024, everybody's looking at the phone, right? It's already isolating us in a lot of ways. And we got to be, as somebody who's worked in the technology field and who writes about these things and the humanity part of it, the human part of it, I'm always conscious of the fact that we don't want the technology to drive us, and we have to be. It has a tendency to do that, and we have a tendency to let it. And so that's one of the things I think we have to be careful of is making sure that we stay in the driver's seat with the technology. Use it when we want to use it, when it's appropriate, that we have to prioritize human relationships first. And I think I don't know whether it's like a pendulum and we've just swung out of balance and we'll swing back. Or whether it's something we really need to it's a longer term trend that we really need to prioritize as individuals. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all these. Just talking to you, you bring up so many great points. Every time you speak, it's amazing. Yeah, I think that human connection thing. We don't with our kids. We do allow them to have screens and like devices, tablets, and things like that. But like my 15-year-old doesn't have social media. Not allowed to have social media, and we
Good.
limit screen time and stuff like that. And the primary purpose for that is for human connection, and I think social media is kind of, it started out as networking, but then it became something completely different. And I hate social media these days, but I have to use it for work, and
Yep, I know, I do too.
it sucks sometimes. But that human connection aspect of it, I really. I really don't know what to do about the cell phones in everybody's hands and everything. Like I do know that that's an issue, and I have that issue myself, and that worries me a little bit with technology and the the more technology comes online, it's
I
the
think
bigger.
you got the right point, which is the only thing that we really have influence over is ourselves in our household, right? So I'm like you. When my son was young, everybody had computer games, right? Everybody had the latest Nintendos, you know, all of the Xboxes and all of that stuff. And I wouldn't get one for my son because I told him that I wanted him out playing basketball and doing other things, and he hated me for years. Now he's in his 40s and he's very grateful because he knows he sees some of those other kids and they're addicted to their games. They're
And he can
addicted
also probably go out to dinner with his wife and not pick up his phone.
girlfriend and not pick up a phone, and he's not always, and he worked for Apple. He worked for Apple for a while. I mean, he had a technology driven mind, but he was also in the medical field for a while. So he learned to have a balance. And that's the important thing. It's not that something is bad, you just have to have it in balance. Anything out of balance is going to throw the system off, including our mental health. And so
Moderation.
yeah, it's really all about that maintaining mental health. And that's not a state responsibility. That's not a corporate responsibility. That's a family and an individual responsibility. And we just need to be strong enough to put our foot down. Now, I have a phone. I have a phone, but I tell everybody I'm of the old school. You can't see, but I have three like huge monitors. Right? I'm just surrounded by huge monitors. If I had my way, I'd have a 20-foot high ceiling wall with a big semicircular, 60 foot wide semicircular, and have the whole thing be monitors, right? I have ADHD like you, and I like going from topic to topic to topic. Okay, I'm studying this screen, now I'm studying this screen, now I'm studying this screen. I'm in nirvana. Um, so when you give me this little tiny phone where I have to have the fingers of a Smurf to type on it, I'm just like, yeah, I know it can do computing, but why?
Right.
Why would I want to, you know? And so I've never really gone there. I use it for phone calls, I write text and maybe get directions on things. I use maybe a couple of two or three different apps. I deleted almost all the others.
Yeah.
And so because to me, it's also the least secure form of computing technology and coming from um, cybersecurity expertise. I know that that phone is a walking vulnerability. And so when I go to the airport, I turn mine off, right? So I'm hyper secure. I don't let people do my facial recognition, right? Because I tell everybody if you lose your password, if your password gets hacked, that's a pain in the ass. I'm so sorry, but you can always reset your password.
Yeah.
If your identity gets stolen, there were 2.5 million identities stolen from a company called Clearview 3 years ago. Every one of those people no longer has control of their own identity because you can't replace your face, your iris. You can't replace those things. So that part of your identity's been lost for good. And so I tell everybody, do not use facial recognition software, particularly if it's a public one like Clear at the airport, any of that stuff. I travel all the time. I'll wait in a long line, but I'm not going to give them my face. And so part of that paranoia is it comes in handy. Part of it is just a pain in the ass that my wife hates.
I just told my wife the other day, like, because I got a notification from YouTube saying that you can now let AI use your content to train itself. And
No thanks.
you have to opt into it. And I told my wife, I was like, why the hell would I want to train my replacement? You know, and it's like it is like that. You know, you had mentioned pendulum swinging one way or to the other. And one of the things that I'm really interested in, I love history and I love human history. You go back to like World War II, World War One, and a lot of the things that are happening were happening back then. It's repeating itself. It's a cycle. And I think the pendulum swing is a big issue with humans in general because we do let that pendulum swing so far. We have to get it back in center, but in order to get it back in center, we have to swing so far the other
The
way.
other question. Yeah.
And it's something that happens over and over and over again in human history. We let the pendulum swing too far before we correct it, and then we have to bring it. So, and I think that's actually what's happening with politics today is the pendulum swinging.
Well, yeah, I think that's part of it. I think there were so many people who were so put off by having a black president that they really went to their their racist roots, and I think it's tragic. I am a student of history as well. I know that the direction we're going right now will not lead well. It's not going to end well. I'm also a student of prophecy. Now, I think it's important when I tell people that I'm a Christian, I have to tell people that I'm a traditional Jesus Christian, not a MAGA Christian. Um, because there really is a big difference right now because there's a form of Christianity that's completely lost its testimony to the world. And what's interesting about that is it's exactly what was prophesied to happen. And so I studied, I listened to prophecy for years, and for many years I heard people teaching prophecy with what I felt were unmistakable biases, right? There were people with sociological bias and even religious bias. It's the Protestants against the Catholic. It's the Christians against the Muslims. It's the Democrats against the or Republicans against the liberal Democrats. And all of that is I'm going to call the BS factor in all of it. All of it is wrong. It's all biases. It all distorts the truth. There's plenty there's more have a reason. And what I decided one time, I always wanted to say, I said, there has to be an objective approach that I can take to decide, are we actually living in prophetic times, or are we just living in some sort of crazy hyper period of change that's always disruptive when people change because nobody likes it? And so I thought, well, there had to be a way, and I stumbled on it by reading a National Geographic article. And the National Geographic article had to do with fish stocks around the world, global fish stocks, and they were basically saying that all of the fish stocks in every major fishing ground around the world was down by at least 30% due to overfishing, pollution, ocean warming, acidification, a bunch of stuff, all basically man-made stuff, right? Man-made activities. And it struck me when I was reading the article that there's a prophecy in Revelations called the seven trumpets. Now, in the seven trumpets, and I realized that prophecies have two parts. They oftentimes have an allegory, and then they have outcomes or attributes. Now, in this case, the allegory was that a flaming rock falls from the sky and lands in the ocean. And that didn't happen. But the attributes were a third of the fish of the sea would die, a third of the birds of the air would die, a third of the beasts of the land would die, and two-thirds of the rivers of the earth were polluted and so polluted you couldn't drink from them. And I realized I had been working with environmental studies while I was with the oil company. I was a champion for EPA activities. I was well aware of the fact that we had already achieved every single one of those milestones, and there was no asteroid that fell in the ocean. So I started thinking, I said, well, what if I got rid of the allegories? Because that's where most of the biases come from. And what if I focused only on attributes and outcomes? I could match those up to current events with 100% correlation, and then I could calculate the probability of that event relative to known human geologic history. And then I could go through and connect all of the things have high correlations and calculate a cumulative probability of those events to see, are we really living in something unusual? Well, I did. I actually created that model. I only took about 25 of the 840 prophecies of the end times, but I took ones that I knew I could get documented correlation with, where I could define the attributes and define the correlations. The outcome of those correlations, now part of it, I agree, was some of these things around the seventh, seven trumpets, but the cumulative probability of that was 1 in 1.4 trillion that this was random chance. In other words, it was 1.4 trillion that we were living in prophetic times. That started me thinking about technology differently. That started me thinking about world systems and history and what I was watching on television differently. That started me thinking about all of these teachers who were teaching about prophecies in ways that were all wrong, that were all full of biases. And that became the factual foundation for the theme in my books of looking at things that are happening in plain sight that have high correlations and low probabilities, and what does that mean for us as a human species? And so again, I try to get it back to humanity, but it becomes interesting to see how all of these things factor together, the politics, the climate, the banking, the technology, the politics, all of it's basically fits into this Jenga puzzle that we all see day to day. And it took me a little while before I could step back and see the bigger picture.
Now, how many books do you have total?
Right now, I have three out. I have The Curse of Cortez. Swarm was the first book in the AI espionage series. The second book in the series, The Last Ark, was inspired when I discovered that there were not only two genuine, authentic, historical Arks of the Covenant that still exist today, both of them resurfaced or changed status in the last several years in news stories never covered in the US press. So I believe that they're actually impacting what's going on in the Middle East today. That book was called If Dan Brown Meets Tom Clancy. So now the next book in the series will be called The Image. And the image will deal with CERN experiments to create a mini black hole in order to prove a fifth dimension, which the computer will call the God dimension. How that clashes with a World Economic Forum initiative, a program going right now to replace the US dollar with an IMF digital currency called the unicorn, which is true, and the 2024 election, and then I'll deal with the history, the true history of the Shroud of Turin that dates back. I'll make the historical markers that go back all the way to the first century.
Man, that's very, very interesting. So, The Curse of Cortez is a standalone book.
That's a standalone. The other three are part of a series.
Okay, so the first of the series is
Swarm,
Swarm, and then The Last Ark, and
and
then
then
the
the
third
next one
book
will be
is
the image will come out in the spring.
awesome. I'm very, very intrigued by all three of those books, but I really want to get into Swarm and The Last Ark. Where can people find those books?
Go to GuyMorrisBooks.com, or you can go straight to Amazon and just look up Guy Morris.
Now I've got I better wrap this up because we've been in here almost an hour and a half. But let me ask you this. What do you think of simulation theory?
Simulation theory being the idea that our consciousness, our reality is a simulation.
Yes.
Um, I'm not necessarily buying into it. I think it's a little bit of a stretch to what we know about the other forms of physics. And I certainly, now it's interesting because when I deal in the next image, I deal with the consciousness within computers. For a computer, that is much more of a reality, right? An AI consciousness, an AI intelligence is by definition a simulation. It runs simulation calculations. It runs the math on simulations. It lives in a digital world, not a dimensional world. And so, but we live in a scientific, a proven, a dimensional world. We know that there are the dimensions that we live in. We know that there are other dimensions beyond that. Science, every one of the science theories of quantum theory, theory of relativity, string theory, emergence theory, all of the major scientific physics theories postulate the math only works if there's more than one, if there's extra dimensions to our universe. We know that as humans, we have limitations in seeing light, wavelengths, light, hearing sounds. There's lots of things we can't perceive. So the fact that we live in a multi-dimensional universe, that reality makes more sense to me. That quantum explanation makes more sense to me and is more factually founded by the science research we already know than the idea that there's some sort of master program and we're living in a simulation.
That's I had to come up with one more question for you. What do you
That's
think of
okay. That's
UF?
okay. And, I always tell everybody, what the hell do I know? I could be wrong, but those are my perceptions based on it. And we try to come up with lots of theories to explain our reality, our shared reality.
Yeah.
Simulation is one of them that only would have come up with. People only thought of that because we build computers that do that, and we think that we anthropomorphize the whole world, the universe. Everything has to be in the form of what we can do. And that's not necessarily the based on that's not that doesn't tie to the reality that I observe.
That's that's incredibly insightful. So, Guy, one more question. What do you
Sure,
think of
sure.
UFOs? What do you think of
Oh, I
UFOs?
think they exist. I believe they exist. I tend to believe that we're not dealing as much, and this is where I could be wrong as well. We do know we have proven the technology around wormholes, so we could be dealing with extraterrestrial. I tend to wonder more if what we're seeing is interdimensional, right? Where if we already know that we live in a hyperdimensional universe, what we're really dealing with are beings or machines that can cross that threshold into our perception. Now, that's my own perception. I do believe they're real. I believe the government is covering up a lot of what they know. I think part of why they're covering up is because they don't want to admit that they really don't have anything, that these things are more powerful and influential, and we don't know how to stop them. We just really don't have control of the situation, and the government never wants to admit that. So I think they're real. I think that we're going to find out more about them. I tend to think that they're more interdimensional rather than interstellar. That I could be proven wrong on that.
I
Um,
agree.
and I think that it's interesting that our awareness of this is become so acute on a global level. It used to be in history that it was only one or two people would experience things at a time, and they were considered crazy, or visionaries or something. And so I think that our communal awareness of this is coming at a time, again, if I go back to this prophecy element, where we're told to expect an arrival of some sort. And I think that it's interesting that we're seeing these two realities kind of clash at this time. And
Yeah,
so I'm kind of expectant. I'm trying to interesting to see what the next few years will bring.
me too, man. I'm a big UFO nut, and I wonder. So one of the things that think about sometimes is also the extra tempestrial model, which would be future humanity.
Hmm.
I think about that sometimes because I think that's somewhat prophetic in itself. Future humanity coming back to find out where we screwed up. Maybe I don't know, but I think the extra dimensional hypothesis is the more likely.
Hmm.
When you're talking about like Occam's razor, well, Occam's razor, um, it would Occam's razor leans more towards extra dimensional than
Yeah,
extraterrestrial or extra tempestrial.
right.
For
And
me,
it, because it actually makes the most sense, and the science to basically resolve the logistics to make it reality, it makes the most sense.
absolutely.
Traveling 100 million light years out in space without wormhole or some other extra technology along with that doesn't seem practical, doesn't seem likely. If we know that we're living in an extra dimensional universe anyway, the idea that we can just perceive what's going on in that extra dimensional in glimpses makes more sense, and has more probably, I believe, will be easier to prove ultimately than extraterrestrial.
Man, this has been a great conversation. I just remembered something that you were talking about uh, quantum entanglement and human
Mhm.
brains just a little
Yeah,
while
yeah.
ago. And an example that I always give my wife is sometimes, and this tickles the shit out of me when this happens, but my wife and I have been together for 18 years. And
Hmm.
so when you hang out with somebody for that long, you start to think like them.
Hmm.
And sometimes my wife and I have those moments where we have the exact same thought at the exact same time. And the only thing that I can pin that to is quantum entanglement. My wife and I are entangled.
Hmm.
And one day, just out of nowhere, I was thinking about a song and my wife started singing it within 2, 3 seconds,
Hmm.
and I'm like, that is so cool. And I was talking to my wife about it and I was explaining quantum entanglement to her. And I'm like, what our brains are doing right now, that's quantum entanglement.
Yeah, and that's true. That's true. And so it's why we can't really explain all of our human experience with brain intelligence. It's a big piece of it for sure. But there's an extra element there that goes beyond when that brain stops functioning. And that's the quantum piece of it. And that's what we see as near-death experiences, that what we see in spirituality, when people feel like they've had a spiritual experience, a touch from God, answer to prayer, all of those things. As the ancients used to say, as above, so below, right? There's an
As above,
entanglement
so below. I
there.
love that. I love that
There's an
so much.
entanglement there, and that's what we experience. Now, the ancients never could explain it as a scientific principle. They could just observe the aspects of it, that they could, that there was a connection there. And that's what they could observe. They just couldn't explain why that connection was there.
Right.
And so when some people say science and religion are completely different, I call the BS factor on that. I say
Science is a
absolutely
religion.
not. They're absolutely intimately entwined. If God created the universe, science tries to study how that universe was created, what it means, how it works, how it functions. Religion is trying to basically build a relationship on who created it and why and what our purpose is. But they're both looking at the same quantum, extra dimensional realities that we can't really put our hands on, and we're building theories and trying to test against that. So we're both dealing with the same unanswerable questions. We're just dealing with it from different perspectives. They're not counter opposed. They're just looking at different angles of the same problem.
Man, Guy Morris, everybody. It's been a great, great conversation.
Thank you.
And I have a feeling that we're going to do this again, man.
I would love to come back and talk more about the next book when it comes out. I'm very excited about it. I think it's been my most challenging one for sure, but I'm getting early feedback that it's actually the most thought-provoking. So
Awesome, man. And one more time, GuyMorrisBooks.com. You can find The Curse of Cortez there. That's a standalone book. Swarm and The Last Ark. And there's a third book coming in the series.
thank you so much, Ricky.
Thank you, Guy. We'll see you next time.